All right, let's go to the UK, where last week the House of Commons descended into chaos after multiple amendments of a Gaza ceasefire motion were presented to the Speaker. The Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, allowed both Labor and government amendments to a Scottish National Party bill that calls for an immediate ceasefire. By doing so, he broke with long-held convention. I have to say, all hell broke loose. The PM, Rishi Sunak, has slammed the move by the Speaker, and more than 70 MPs have signed a no-confidence motion in Hoyle. For more on this, I'm joined now by the editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater. I watched all of this over many, many hours, Tom. I mean, it was huge, and it was a big departure from convention. Just take my viewers through it step by step of how extraordinary it all was and why it created the headlines it did.
Yes, there's almost two layers to this particular circus as we saw it unfold in the House of Commons. So when Lindsay Hoyle called both this Labour and this Conservative amendment to an SNP motion, as you say, he was breaking with convention. The question is, why did he do it? So the more superficial claim, I think, is that he was lent on by the Labour Party, which is also his own party. He's bound to be impartial, but that he is a Labour MP, to call the Labour amendment to break with convention so as to save Labour's blushes, to stop many of their MPs from voting with the SNPs to demonstrate that they backed a ceasefire. Then the deeper question is why, even if he did give into that pressure, did he do so? And when he came to the House to explain himself after all of the thrills and spills and the upset within the House of Commons over this, he did so, he said, and I think genuinely, because he's concerned about the safety of MPs. He even said very explicitly the following day, "I do not want to get a phone call and find out that another member of this House has been murdered by a terrorist." So even if the Labour Party did lean on Lindsay Hoyle in a way that I think is pretty plausible, I think the way in which they convinced him is still deeply chilling, in that there is clearly a terroristic threat to MPs. And we know where that's coming from. It's coming from Islamist extremists who have been riding high since October.
Yeah, there was a lot of emotion in that speech you gave the next day, and I think I agree with you. I thought it was absolutely genuine. I mean, how fearful are MPs? I mean, I was there in London when there was 100,000 plus on the street, not just pro-Palestinian, I mean, very anti-Semitic, anti-Western in their rhetoric. What's the mood around London in particular at the moment, Tom?
The mood is incredibly intense, and I think MPs have a right to be concerned. It was only a couple of years ago, in 2021, that David Ames, a Tory MP, was murdered by an Islamist terrorist because of his support for airstrikes against Islamic State. We've had a Conservative MP, Mike Freer, recently announced that he's going to step down at the next election. He represents one of the most Jewish constituencies in the country because he's been menaced with death threats for many years. We had a Labour MP in 2010, Stephen Timms, who was stabbed by an Al-Qaeda fangirl, luckily survived. And we had the 2017 terrorist attack on Westminster, which claimed the lives of 5 people, including a policeman whose job it was to protect Parliament. So this isn't made up. And what I find so dispiriting about a lot of the discussion, though, is that even Lindsay Hoyle, even our MPs, cannot summon the courage to name the threat. They talk generally about intimidation and harassment and so on. They never use the I word, Islamism. And that's clearly where it's coming from. So the fact that we can't even name the threat, I think, is deeply troubling going forward.
Well, I think this is why Suella Braverman's comments, former Home Secretary, of course, for Australians who are not sure of her, she's a current MP on the backbench. I mean, her comments didn't miss. She named the I threat. She called it Islamism. She wrote an opinion piece in the Telegraph and she said Islamists are bullying Britain into submission. Now, I know the left are rounded on her, but I suspect she's got a fair amount of support in the community, doesn't she, Tom?
I think so. I mean, in terms of the message she was putting across, whenever Suella Braverman pops up, people seem to focus so much on some of the rhetoric, which can be a bit over the top or what have you, but they miss the fundamental point that she's making, which is absolutely right, which is to say that in terms of this country, we have capitulated to Islamist intimidation time and again. We've seen that in Parliament over the past week. We've seen that with things like the Batley Grammar School teacher controversy, where Islamists rounded on and effectively pushed into hiding a teacher because he showed Muhammad cartoons. This is something that we've seen time and again. And I wish politicians would stop having kind of long rows over particular language a particular politician might have used and whether or not it was a bit overheated, and look at the fundamental issue, which is that this is a genuine threat within our midst, which our politicians, with some exceptions, feel incapable of even beginning to address.
Tom Slater, thank you for your time.